One could argue that if Corvain had only kept his mouth shut, the waitress would never have set foot in the warrior's arena. But then again, if the beta of Greymark had ever once bothered to learn the name of the woman who filled his cup, he'd have known better than to call her Helpless. So really, when you followed the whole ruin back to its root, it was his doing. Every last splinter of it. The iron oak was loud the night before the proving. It always was. Once a year, the arena threw its gates open to anyone reckless enough to bleed for a place among the Alpha King's warriors, and once a year, every hungry, half-trained pup from the outer holds came to Carrick to drink like they'd already won. Eloan had been carrying trays since noon. She was small and quick and easy to lose in a crowd, which suited her fine, because the less a room noticed her, the more of it she got to watch. And she watched everything. She watched the corner table, where a boy from the Riverhold kept counting his coin like it might multiply. She watched the door for the two brothers who liked to leave, without paying. And she watched, because everyone did, the long table at the heart of the room where Corvain sat with his warriors. The beta of Greymark was built the way the story said a beta should be. Golden, broad through the shoulder, a smile that arrived a half-second before he decided to use it. Second only to the king himself, and he wore it easily. The way a man wears a coat he's never once had to pay for. His warriors laughed when he laughed. They drank when he drank. And when Eloan crossed behind his chair with a full tray, one of them, a thick-necked fighter named Bracken, shot out a boot to trip her, just to watch the pot girl fall. She didn't fall. She stepped over it without looking, set the ale down, and moved on. It was such a small thing that no one caught it. No one, except Corvain. Bracken, the beta said mildly, I think she just made you look slow. The table roared. Bracken's ears went red. And Eloan, who knew better, kept walking. Right up until Bracken caught her wrist and hauled her back. Say sorry, he said. For your foot, Eloan asked. It's still attached. You're welcome. That should have been the end of it. It would have been if Corvain hadn't been bored, and a little drunk, and looking for something to amuse a table full of men who'd ridden days to hear him be clever. Let her go, he said, and Bracken did. Corvain tipped his chair onto its back legs and looked at her the way a man looks at a card he's already decided to throw away. You've a mouth on you, for someone who carries cups for a living. I've a mouth on me for someone who's tired, Eloan said. It's a big night. Half these men will be sick on my floor by the second bell. They're fighters, Corvain said. Tomorrow they bleed for the honor of the pack. And you'll be, he gestured, taking in the tray, the apron, all of her, mopping, someone has to. He smiled, and it was worse than a sneer because it was almost gentle. It's just, you look at them like you think you understand it. The proving, the arena. He shook his head. You don't. You couldn't. You're a small, soft, helpless little thing, and the kindest fact of your life is that no one will ever ask you to prove otherwise. And there it was. The table liked that. They always liked it when he was cruel, in a pretty voice. Now, if Eloan had been smart, if she'd been the careful, invisible woman who'd survived 9 years in this city by never once giving anyone a reason to look twice, she'd have smiled and refilled his cup and let it go. She was almost certain that was what she was about to do. Instead, she heard herself say, "Helpless. It's not an insult," Corvain said. "Most people are. Would you like to test it?" The words dropped into the noise, and the noise went strange around them, thinning at the edges. Corvain's smile didn't move, but something behind his pale eyes sharpened, the way still water sharpens just before something breaks the surface. "Test it," he repeated. "You've a whole arena for it," Eloan said. "Open to anyone tomorrow. Isn't that the boast? Any fool with a death wish. So put your name where your mouth is, bata. Or is the great open proving only open to the men you've already decided are worth watching?" For one heartbeat, Corvain simply looked at her. Then he laughed, a real one, delighted, tipping his head back. and the table exhaled and laughed with him, because the beta was amused, and if the beta was amused, then the little pot girl was a joke and not a problem. "All right," he said, wiping his eye. "All right. You want to enter the proving. You, against the meanest half-wild pups in the territory. In a ring most of them won't walk out of upright." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and pitched his voice for the whole room, because a good performer always plays to the back. "Tell you what, little cup girl, enter. Fight. And if you win so much as a single bout, one, I'll wed you myself, here, before the whole pack." Beta's honor. The Iron Oak howled. "You'll what?" someone shouted. "Wed her." Corvain called, spreading his hands, grinning like a man who has just found the funniest thing he'll say all year. "Mate! Marry the whole right! Why not? A helpless little waitress wins the warrior's arena. Gods, I'll deserve whatever I get." He turned back to Eloin and dropped his voice. "Warm and lazy and certain, just for her. But you won't. You'll go home tonight and think better of it, and pour ale for the rest of your sensible little life. And that's not cruelty, girl, that's mercy. You'll thank me for it." He lifted his cup to her, a toast to a fight that would never happen, and turned back to his men. Eloin stood a moment with the empty tray against her hip. Then she set it down on his table, carefully, the way someone sets down a thing they've decided they no longer need, and she walked to the far wall where the arena roster hung on its nail, for anyone bold or stupid enough to add a name before dawn. She took up the charstick. Behind her she heard Bracken start to say something and heard it choke off. She heard the laughter falter, table by table, as heads turned. By the time she pressed the stick to the parchment, the Iron Oak, packed shoulder to shoulder, loud as a storm all night, had gone so quiet she could hear the scratch of her own name going down. Eloin, of Carrick. When she turned around, Corvain wasn't smiling anymore. The charstick was still warm in her fingers when Tamsin reached her. "Are you out of your mind?" Tamsin hissed, dragging her by the elbow into the shadow of the kitchen arch. Tamsin had worked the Iron Oak longer than Eloin had been alive. She had forearms like a dockhand, and the flat, fearless stare of a woman who'd broken up 1,000 brawls. Right now the stare was frightened, and that frightened Eloin more than Corvain had. "Tell me you didn't. Tell me the whole room imagined it. I signed." "Take it back." "You can't take it back," Eloin said. "That's the whole point of the roster. Once your name's down, you fight, or you're named coward before the pack." She said it lightly. Her hands, she noticed, were not quite steady. "No takebacks." He said so himself. "He was making sport of you. I know exactly what he was doing." Pell shoved through the crowd to reach them, the youngest of the Iron Oak's crew, all elbows and worry. "They're saying, the whole tavern's saying, you're in the proving. That's not. You can't actually." "Why does everyone keep telling me what I can't do?" Eloin said. "As though I haven't heard it enough for one night." Pell flinched, and she was sorry for it. But Tamsin was already talking over them both, low and fast. "Listen to me. In the morning, you go to the arena master. You tell him you were drunk. You scratch the name. He'll let it slide. Girls like you aren't worth the trouble of a death. Corvain forgets you by noon. That's the version where you live. And if I fight." "If you fight," Tamsin said, "you die in front of a laughing crowd, and I clean what's left off the sand." Her voice cracked on it. "You're not a fighter, Elle. I love you, but you carry trays. That's not a shame. It's a life. Don't throw it in the dirt, because a golden fool, with more teeth than sense, wanted a laugh." Eloin looked at her, at Tamsin, who had fed her the first week she'd come to Carrick with nothing. A half-starved thing of 13 who wouldn't say where she'd come from or what she'd run from. Tamsin had never once asked. That was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her, the not asking, which was exactly why Tamsin didn't know. "I have to see to my tables," Eloin said gently, and pulled free. She didn't go home when the last drunk had been poured into the street. She went up the hill instead, past the shuttered forges and the temple with its cold lamps, to the crooked yard behind the tanner's row, where a sign too faded to read still hung above a gate. Nobody trained there anymore. Nobody remembered it had ever been a place where a king's blade was made. Halvard was awake. Halvard was always awake. Old wars did that to a man's sleep. He didn't look up from the whetstone when the gate creaked. "You're out late," he said. "For a girl who pours ale." You heard. The whole city heard. The stone rasped, patient, along a blade that had no business being as fine as it was, in a yard as poor as this. Corvain's little wager is halfway to the coast by now. By tomorrow, they'll be laying odds in the fish market on how many breaths you last. He set the blade down at last and looked at her, and his eyes, one gone milky, the other sharp as ever, moved over her the way they had when she was small and furious and grieving, and he'd been the only one who didn't tell her to be softer. "Sit down, Aloin." She didn't sit. "You trained me for 9 years. I did. In the dark. In this yard, where no one could see." Her jaw was tight. "You told me never to show it. Never to fight where it counted. Keep your head down, you said. Be small. Be the last thing anyone looks at." Her voice was rising, and she couldn't stop it. "Why teach me at all, if the whole point was that I'd never use it?" For a long moment, Halvard said nothing. The old dog by the forge sighed and resettled. "Because your mother asked me to," he said at last. "Before the end, teach her to survive, Halvard," she said. "But don't teach her to be seen. Seen is how they found us. Seen is how she died." He picked the blade back up, and there was something in the set of his shoulders she couldn't read. "The arena is not survival, girl. The arena is the most seen a person in Greymark can be, every eye in the pack, the king's own. The beta who thinks you're a joke," the stone began again, slow. "You go in there tomorrow, and you stop being invisible forever. You understand what that costs?" "He called me helpless," Eloin said, "in front of all of them. Men have called you worse, not where I had to smile and pour their drink." She swallowed. "I'm tired, Halvard. I'm tired of being the last thing anyone ever looks at." Halvard stopped sharpening. Then, slowly, he reached behind the bench and drew out a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth, one she'd never seen, though she'd known every corner of this yard for 9 years. He set it in her hands. It was heavier than it looked. "Den, don't lose," he said, "because the pack that rules this city has grown fat and blind and cruel, and it feeds men like Corvain and starves girls like you, and it will not forgive you for embarrassing it. Win, and they'll hate you. Lose, and they'll bury you." His good eye held her. "There's no version of tomorrow where you walk out the same person. So walk out a winner, at least, then it's on your terms." She unwrapped the cloth halfway. Steel caught the forge light. "Go home," Halvard said, turning back to his work. "Sleep, if you can, and Aloin." He didn't look up. "Whatever you do in that ring, don't let them see your whole hand, not even to win. A card they haven't seen is the only card that's still yours." The morning came gray and enormous. The warrior's arena sat at the top of Karak like a stone crown, and by the first bell its tiers were already filling, thousands of them, the whole pack and half the territory besides, drawn by a rumor too good to miss. She heard the name follow her down the entrance tunnel, the pups twice her size, giving her a wide berth as though she carried something catching. Potgirl, the waitress. Corvain's little wager. Somewhere in the shaded gallery, where the pack's own sat, the Alpha King would be watching, and below him, at the rail, gold, in the gray morning. She didn't let herself look for Corvain. She looked at the sand. An arena official read her name from the roster, squinted at her, and plainly decided she wasn't worth a second squint. "Eloin of Karak, first bout. Gate's yours." He jerked a thumb at the iron grate at the end of the tunnel, beyond which the roar of the crowd rose and fell like surf. "Gods keep you, girl. You'll want them." The bundle was strapped across her back. Her heart was slow and loud. The grate began to rise. Sunlight hit her like a slap. Sand, noise, a wall of faces climbing up and up into the gray. Across the ring stood her first opponent, and the crowd's laughter told her everything before she'd taken his measure. Herself, they'd matched the pot girl against a monster for sport. He was a head and a half taller than her, slabbed with muscle, a Riverholds brawler with scarred knuckles and a grin already forming because he too had heard the joke, and he too meant to be the fist that landed the punchline. His name, someone bawled, was Draveth. It didn't matter. Eloan had learned long ago that a big man's name was the least useful thing about him. He came at her the way big men always did. Fast, sure, certain the first blow would end it. And it nearly did, because she let it. She wanted the crowd to see the pot girl stagger. She gave them a stumble, a gasp, a girl barely keeping her feet, and the arena howled its delight and its pity, and up at the rails she felt, rather than saw, Corvain ease back, satisfied, ready to be merciful about it afterward. Don't let them see your whole hand. Draveth grinned and wound up for the blow that would put her down for good. She wasn't there when it landed. She'd like to say the arena went silent, but it didn't. It changed pitch, a strange rising note, as 5,000 people tried to work out what they'd seen. The girl who'd been stumbling a breath ago had slipped inside the big man's reach, like water finding a crack, and there was a sound, like a green branch breaking. And Draveth was on his knees in the sand, cradling an arm that bent where no arm should bend. She hadn't drawn the blade from her back. She hadn't needed to. Yield, Eloan said quietly, or the other one. He yielded. For a moment, nobody in the whole vast bowl made a sound. Then it broke over her all at once, not cheering, not yet, but a great confused roar of disbelief, thousands of voices asking one another the same question. Eloan stood in the center of the sand with her chest heaving and did not smile, did not bow, did not look up at the gallery. She simply turned in a slow circle, so that every tear could see her still standing, and let the truth of it land on them one face at a time. The waitress had won her bout. She let herself look at the rail. Then just once. Corvain was on his feet. The easy, golden certainty was gone from his face as though it had been wiped off with a rag, and what lay underneath it she couldn't name. Shock, yes, but something else moving fast behind it, something that counted and measured. Their eyes met across the sand. She lifted her chin, the exact half-inch he lifted his. The night before, no take-backs, beta. The arena master had reached the king's gallery. She watched him stoop to the shaded seat where Alpha King Osric sat unreadable, and she watched the whole pack lean in with her, because everyone in Carec had drunk the same wager last night, and everyone knew what a beta's word before witnesses was worth. Corvain got there first. He laughed. She heard it carry, forced bright over the noise. Well fought, he called down to the sand, throwing his arms wide for the crowd truly. The girls got teeth. A fine joke, and I've had my nose bloodied for the making of it. Let's leave it there, eh? Drinks on the beta. A scatter of relieved laughter answered him. Men glad to let the strange morning become a story instead of a problem. But the Alpha King had risen. Osric of Greymark did not raise his voice. He never had to. He came to the front of the gallery, and the arena fell quiet. The way a forest falls quiet, and he looked down at the girl on the sand, and then for a long moment at his beta. A helpless little waitress wins the warrior's arena, the king said, and Eloan understood, with a cold drop in her stomach, that he was quoting Corvain's own words back at him, exact, the way a man reads aloud from a contract. And I'll wed her myself, before the whole pack. Beta's honor. He let it hang. Those were your terms, Corvain, sworn before more witnesses than I've had at a coronation. The king's mouth curved, and there was no warmth in it at all. You are my second. A Beta's word is the iron this pack is built on. If yours bends the very morning, it cost you something, then it was never worth the breath you spent. And neither perhaps are you. The silence had teeth now. Corvain's face had gone very still. Majesty, she's a serving girl. She's the victor, said Osric, of the ring you sent her into. He turned from his beta as though the matter were already closed, and looked down at Elowen, and she felt the full weight of an Alpha King's attention settle on her for the first time in her life, and understood at last exactly what Halvard had meant about being seen. Elowen of Carrick, you hold a champion's right and a beata's oath. Do you hold him to it? Every face in the arena turned to her. She thought of 9 years of never being asked. She thought of Corvain's warm, lazy, merciful voice. You'll thank me for it. She thought of her mother and being small and being the last thing anyone ever looked at. I do, Elowen said. And so it was that the waitress, the beta, had called Helpless won a single bout in the Warriors arena, and won, along with it, the one prize in all of Greymark, that Corvain of the Golden Smile could not laugh, buy, or bully his way out of. Herself, bound to marry him, neither of them, standing in that ringing arena, could yet have said which of them had just lost. The arena had barely emptied before they came for her. Not the rough hands she'd braced for, but 2 liveried houseguards, with the Grey Wolf of Greymark on their breasts, who bowed, actually bowed, and said, the Beta's household requested her presence. Requested, as though she had a choice. As though the whole city hadn't just watched her seize one by force. They put her in a side room beneath the arena, stone and torch smoke, and left her there long enough for the shaking to start. Not fear shaking after shaking, the kind that came when the body finally understood the danger was past and the mind understood it had only begun. Corvain came alone. The golden ease was gone. Without an audience, he was a different animal, the smile packed away, the pale eyes flat and quick, and for the first time she saw the thing that had made him beta, and not merely the king's handsome friend. He shut the door. He looked at her the way a man looks at a debt. Name your price, he said. I don't, everyone has one. He crossed the room. You've had a clever morning. Truly, I'll be telling it for years, but we both know what this was. You wanted to bloody my nose in front of the pack, and you did, beautifully, and now you'll want paying for the trouble of climbing back down. So, name it. Coin, a house. Passage to any hold in the territory, with silver enough to open a tavern of your own and never carry another man's cup again. Say the number, and in return, I stand up before the pack and release you from your oath. In return, Corvain said, you live. No, Elowen said. Something flickered across his face, not anger, surprise. He had not expected no. You think I did this for coin? She went on. For a house, or a story to tell in my old age. You think there's a number? She shook her head slowly. I stopped being invisible in front of 5,000 people this morning, Beta. There's no house far enough to buy that back. Wherever I run now, I run as the pot girl who broke a champion and shamed the king's second, and then took his silver to vanish. You'd be making me a coward for sale. Her chin came up. If I'm to be seen, I'll be seen on my own terms. Standing next to what I won. Even if what I won is you. For a long moment, he only looked at her. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, short, and without any of the performance in it. Gods, he said quietly, you actually mean it. He dragged a hand down his face, and when it fell, the mask was already reassembling, charm, returning to him, piece by piece. You've no idea what you've walked into. None. The arena is the safest room you will ever stand in, girl, and you just traded it for mine. He pulled the door open. You'll wish you'd taken the money. And then he was gone, and she was alone with the torch smoke and the enormous, spreading understanding of what she'd done. It wasn't the marriage that frightened her. A marriage was a thing that happened to a person from the outside. She could stand inside it like armor and let it mean nothing. It was the rest. 9 years she had spent making herself the last thing anyone looked at, because her mother had died being looked at, and now she had climbed onto the highest wall in Greymark and lit herself like a beacon. Whoever had wanted the women of her blood, dead, and someone had, once, badly enough to finish it. That someone need only glance at Carrick now to find her. Seen is how they found us, her mother had said. Seen is how she died. She had traded a hunted girl's oldest rule for one morning, of not being small. The door did open again, and it was Tamsin, who had talked or shoved her way past the house guards, red-faced, Pell hovering white-faced behind her. She crossed the little room and took Eloin's face in both her rough hands and simply looked at her, hunting for the wound, the break, the thing that would need cleaning off the sand. She found her whole. "You won," Tamsin said, as though the words were in a language she was still learning. "I won. You mad, mad girl." And then Tamsin pulled her in hard, and Eloin let herself be held for the length of 3 breaths. The last unguarded thing she would allow herself for a long while, though she didn't yet know that. Over Tamsin's shoulder, Pell was crying and pretending not to. "Your things." Tamsin pulled back, scrubbing at her eyes. Gruff again. "I packed them. Wasn't much." She pressed a small bundle into Eloin's hands. 9 years of a life, and it weighed almost nothing. "You come back to us. You hear? Whatever grand place they lock you in. The Ironok's got a stool with your name on it, and I'll break the arm of anyone who sits it." "Tamsin, don't." The older woman's jaw worked. "Don't say a soft thing or I'll never get down the hill." She held Eloin's eyes one last moment, fierce and frightened and proud all at once, then took Pell by the collar and was gone, and the little room was colder for it. When the door opened a final time, she was braced for the guards to march her off. Instead, it was a single house steward, gray to the ankles, who inclined his head and said the words that turned her cold. "The Alpha King will see you," he said alone. Now, the king did not receive her in a throne room. He received her in a plain gray study with a fire and 2 chairs, and that she would understand only later was the most frightening choice he could have made, because a throne is a wall a man puts between himself and you, and Osric of Greymark had decided he needed no wall. "Sit," he said, and she sat. He studied her without hurry, the way Halvard studied a blade for the flaw that would fail it. Up close. The Alpha King was older than the coins made him, gray threading the dark at his temples, and his eyes had the terrible patience of a man who had long ago stopped needing to win quickly. "You fight," he said at last. "Like someone taught you when you were small, before the muscle. It's in the feet. A grown fighter learns tricks. A child learns balance, and never loses it." He tilted his head. "Where does a waitress learn balance?" "Eloin of Carrick. I fell down a great deal as a girl, Majesty." The ghost of something crossed his face. "You should know that when a stranger breaks my champion's arm without drawing steel, I have her looked into. It's not suspicion. It's housekeeping." He let the fire pop between them. "There is no Eloin born in Carrick, 9 years gone. No family, no hold, no record. You arrived one winter half-starved, 13 years old, and simply began, as though the world had made you that morning at the city gate." He was not smiling. "I don't tell you this to threaten you. I tell you, so you understand that I already know there is a door in you that's shut, and that I have chosen for now not to open it. People will tell you the king enforced Corvain's oath out of honor. Honor is the reason I give. The reason I have is that I wanted you where I could see you." Her mouth had gone dry. "Why? Because a pack that laughs at a girl who beats a champion is a pack that has forgotten how to be afraid of anything," Osric said. "And a pack that has forgotten fear is a pack about to learn it." He rose and the audience was ending, and she understood she'd been told a great deal and almost nothing. "You'll live in my beta's household until the right. You'll keep your place on the proving roster, you earned it, and I'll not have it said, the crown lets a champion rot. And you'll keep those clever eyes open. Eloin, there are fewer friends in that compound than the banners suggest." At the door he paused. "Corvain will make your life difficult. Let him. It's the truest thing about him, and you'll want to know what's true, before the end." She would remember that, later, before the end. As though he'd already read the last page, the Beta's compound was a stone quarter of the palace grounds, its own barracks and training yards and cold halls, and it took against her at once. The warriors were Corvain's, hand-picked and loyal, and to them, she was the humiliation walking their corridors in borrowed clothes. They didn't strike her. They did worse. They behaved as though she weren't there, stepping around her like a spill, letting doors fall shut in her face, which was, she thought bitterly, the one insult she had spent her whole life engineering and now could not stand. It was Corvain, of all people, who ended it. She was crossing the training yard on the third morning when a broad warrior named Rule failed to see her and put a shoulder into her hard enough to spill her against the rail. She caught herself, she said nothing, and she was turning away when Corvain's voice came lazy across the yard. Ruel, pick up the practice blades, both racks. Then run the west wall until the noon bell. A silence. I said she broke Travith's arm without steel. You've a whole body of bones for her to practice on, if you'd like to keep being clumsy near her. The warrior went gray and went to the blades. Corvain didn't look at her. He was leaning against the yard post, arms folded, watching his men spar, and when she came to stand near him, because she would not scurry off, not with the yard watching, he spoke, without turning his head, pitched low, only for her. Don't mistake that for kindness, he said. A man who lets his household haze his betrothed looks weak. I can't afford to look weak, that's all it was. I know, Eloin said. He glanced at her then, sidelong, and something in his face she hadn't seen before, a flicker of reassessment, quickly buried. You know, he repeated. You told me in the tunnel, she said. The arena's the safest room I'll stand in. A man doesn't warn a woman he means to let drown. She watched the sparring. You're not kind, Beta, but you're not what you sell them either. I'm only saying I can tell the difference. For once, Corvain, of the golden smile, had nothing clever ready. He opened his mouth, and the yard bell for the evening watch had barely begun to toll when the horse screamed. It was his horse, the big gray stallion being led across the far end of the yard, and it reared with a sound she'd never heard an animal make, and Corvain was already moving toward it, cursing, when Eloin saw the thing he didn't, the glint high on the gallery above the yard, the crossbow steadying on the man distracted below. She hit him at the waist, and they went down together into the dirt as the bolt punched through the rail where his throat had been. An accident, Corvain said. They were in his private rooms an hour later, and he'd said it 4 times now, and it had stopped sounding like a fact and started sounding like a prayer. A recruit, cleaning a bow, he went on, pouring wine he didn't drink. A groom who let the stallion get spooked. These things. The bolt was aimed, Eloin said. I watched it steady on you. A dropped bow doesn't lead a moving man. She was sitting on the edge of his table because her legs still didn't entirely trust her, and her forearm had a graze she didn't remember getting. And the horse didn't spook. Someone put something under the saddle blanket to make it scream on cue. To turn every head in the yard the one way, so no one would be looking the other. That's not an accident, Beta. That's choreography. He set the decanter down very carefully. And what would a waitress know about choreography? The same thing a waitress knows about balance, she said, and watched him remember the king's words in her mouth, and watched him decide, for reasons of his own, not to ask. Even if you're right, he said instead, you'll say nothing. Not to the watch, not to the king, not to that tavern of yours. Do you understand me? No, she said, I don't. Someone tried to kill you, and you want to hide it. Why? For a moment, she thought he'd deflect again. She was learning the shape of him, the way he slid sideways off anything that came too close to true. But he only looked tired. Suddenly, tired in a way. The golden version of him would never have allowed a witness. Because, he said, if it's known that the beta can be shot in his own yard, then it's known the king's second isn't safe, which is, a very short walk from the king isn't safe. And there are men in this pack who have been waiting a long time to take that walk. He met her eyes. I can survive being a joke, Eloin. I've made a life of it. What I cannot survive is being a weakness. Leave it, please. It was the please that undid her arguing, because it cost him something, and he was a man who hated to spend. So she left it out loud. She did not leave it at all. He surprised her the next night. She was in the training yard after the compound slept, walking the ground where the stallion had screamed, crouching where the bowman must have knelt when his voice came out of the dark. You'll catch a chill, detecting. You'll catch a bolt standing in the open, she said without turning. A pause. Then, to her surprise, he came and crouched beside her at the foot of the gallery, following her eyeline up to the empty post. Go on, Nen, he said, and there was no mockery in it. You've been chewing on this for days. I can all but hear it across a room. Show me what the waitress sees. So she showed him. She walked him through it, the sightline, the single spot on the whole gallery where a man could watch the yard and not be seen from the hall, the way the attack had needed the horse and the bell, and the turning of every head at once, the way it had needed time, someone unhurried, someone who'd known the yard would fill at the evening watch. And Corvain, whom she'd braced to interrupt her with something clever, only listened, his head tipped, his pale eyes moving where she pointed. When she finished, he was quiet a moment. You'd have made a wicked beta, he said. It came out oddly, not a jibe, something nearer to envy. I'd have made a wicked anything, given the chance, Iloan said. Girls like me don't get given chances, we get given trays. He looked at her then, really looked, the golden performance nowhere in his face, and for a moment, in the cold dark yard, they were only two people bent over the same puzzle. And it was. She would be furious about this later. Easy. Easier than anything had been in 9 careful years. Ask me something, he said quietly. You've 100 questions behind your teeth. Ask one. I'll even tell you the truth. If I can find it, I'm out of practice. She should have asked who could touch the seal. She should have asked who wanted him dead. Instead, because the dark made her reckless, she asked, why do you let them think you're a fool? And for a heartbeat, just one, she watched Corvain of the golden smile decide whether to answer. She saw the true thing rise in him. And she saw him swallow it back down, out of 9 years of his own hard habit. And something in her ached at how well she knew the shape of that particular swallow. Good night, Iloan, he said, and rose, and left her in the yard, with the questions still warm and unanswered between them. What she did instead, in the days that followed, was what she was good at. She watched, and she gathered. And because she had spent 9 years reading a tavern floor, who owed whom, who was about to bolt, which smile hid a knife, she read the compound the same way, and within 3 nights she found the thread. It was in the watchbook. Every household kept one, the roster of who stood which wall on which night, and the betas was a battered thing chained to a lectern in the guard hall. Iloan, who no one watched because no one thought her worth watching, read it by lamp after the halls went quiet. And there it was, plain as a spill on clean sand, on the night of the yard attack, the outer gallery watch, the one post from which a bowman could have looked down into the yard, had been thinned from 2 men to none, reassigned. In a hand, not the watch captain's under a seal, she had to hold to the lamp to be sure of, and then wished she hadn't. The household seal, the beta's own, the one thing in the compound. Only 2 men were permitted to touch. Someone inside these walls had cleared the killing field the night before the arrow flew. Someone with the authority to move Corvain's own guards off Corvain's own wall. This was no outer enemy scaling the stones. The danger wasn't coming for the household, it was living in it. She was still bent over the book, the cold understanding settling into her like water into stone, when a floorboard breathed behind her and a hand closed warm around her wrist. You should be asleep, Corvain said, and where his skin touched hers, something cracked open, like a struck flint, a bright foreign flood of feeling that was not her own, fear and fury, and underneath it, appallingly relief at the sight of her. It slammed up her arm and into her chest and was gone. The instant he let go, both of them lurching back a step, staring at each other in the lamplight, with the exact same expression of dawning, unwilling horror, he had felt it too. "What?" Eloin breathed. "Was that?" Neither of them said the word bond. They stood in the guard hall, with the watchbook between them and the lamp guttering, and Corvain's face did the thing she was learning to read, the swift internal shutting, doors closing one after another, and when he spoke, his voice had gone smooth and careful and false. "You're overtired," he said. "Static off the wool. It's a dry season." It wasn't static. "Go to bed, Eloin," he left. He left fast, which told her more than anything he'd said, because Corvain did not hurry. Hurry was for men who hadn't yet decided how to look. She stood alone in the guard hall, with her wrist still humming where he'd gripped it, and the certain knowledge that she had felt, for one impossible instant, the inside of another person, and that he had felt hers. And that it had frightened the king's beta, badly enough to make him run. She filed it, where she filed, everything she couldn't use yet, and went back to the thing she could. The seal? 2 men in the compound were permitted to touch the household seal, the beta, and the warden, who kept his hall, a gray slab of a man named Taor, who had served 3 betas, and had a face like a shut gate. Corvain had not thinned his own wall to invite a bowman to his own throat. That left Taor, or someone Taor had let near the seal press. So Eloin watched Taor. She learned his rounds, the hour he drank and the hour he prayed, the way he touched the doorframe of the armory each time he passed it, like a man greeting a dog. And she found nothing. Taor was exactly what he appeared, a joyless, loyal old wolf, who loved the compound the way other men loved wives, and who would sooner cut off his own hand than lend it to murder. It was almost disappointing. A guilty man she could have caught, an innocent one only meant the guilty one was cleverer than the walls suggested. Meanwhile, there was Corvain, who would not leave her be. He told himself, she was sure, that he was watching her because she was dangerous. He came to the yard when she trained. He appeared at her shoulder in corridors. He argued with her about the watch and the roster and whether a short blade beat a long one in a close room, and lost the last one badly and enjoyed losing it, and neither of them touched the other, because they had both felt what touching did now, and they were both cowards about it in exactly the same way. "You're staring, Beta," she said one evening, not looking up from the whetstone. "I'm strategizing," said Corvain. "I can't work out how a pot girl learned to hold a room. You did it in the tunnel, your first morning. You did it on the sand. You do it now, in my own hall, and my own men have started standing straighter when you pass, and they'd cut their tongues out before admitting why." He was quiet a moment. "It should make me want you gone. It doesn't. I find that inconvenient." She did look up then. The bond gave a low, warm pull, like a tide testing a rope, and she let herself hold his eyes for exactly 1 breath longer than was safe before she looked away. "Go to bed, Beta," she said, and heard him laugh softly as he went. Her second bout in the proving came on a bright, cold morning, and she should have known something was wrong the moment she saw who they'd matched her against. Not a lumbering brawler this time. A lean, quiet killer named Sarn, a man with a reputation from the coast, Holds, who stepped onto the sand already loosening his shoulders, like the outcome bored him. He was good, better than good, fast and economical, no wasted motion, and she was working, really working, when she caught the wrongness in the light off his blade. Arena steel was blunted for the early rounds. Every fighter knew it, the rule as old as the ring. Sarn's edge threw a thin, bright line where no blunted edge should throw one. His blade was live. And when it opened a shallow line across her shoulder, and the cut burned far past what a cut should, she understood the rest, live and dressed with something. Someone had paid a Coast Holds killer to end the pot girl in the one place a death looked like sport. She stopped fighting to win points and started fighting to live, and it was a near thing, closer than the arm she'd broken, because the venom was making the sand tilt at the edges. She took him in the end, with a throw he never saw, put him down with a knee on his spine, and her mouth at his ear. Who paid you? But he only laughed, blood in it, and said, "You're already too late, girl," and would say no more. She won. She walked off the sand on her own feet, which cost her everything she had, and she did not look at the gallery, because she did not want whoever had bought that blade to see how much it had cost. She went to find Corvain, to tell him the ring itself had turned against her now, and his rooms were empty, and on his desk, half slid beneath a map of the compound walls, was a paper that stopped her breath. It was old. The ink had browned. It was an inquiry in a clerk's tidy hand, years stale, and it bore a name she had not seen written since she was 13 years old and running, her mother's name, and beneath it, in a newer hand she already knew, Corvain's own, a single line. "She doesn't know what she is. Keep her close. Say nothing." Eloin stood very still. Corvain had lied to her. He'd told her, that first night in the tunnel and every night since, that he had no notion why she'd been hunted, who her people were, what door in her, the king had seen and left shut. He had known all along. The only question left was how big the lie was. She meant to confront him with it. She had the paper folded in her fist, and a cold, clean fury holding her upright in place of the strength the venom had stolen. And she waited in his rooms for him to come, and rehearsed the words, and they were good words, and every one of them left her the instant he walked through the door and saw the state of her. "You're grey," he said, and crossed the room fast. "Alone. You're bleeding. Through your—" His hands came up and stopped hovering, because touching her meant the bond. And even now, even reaching for a wounded woman, he hesitated over the cost of it. "What happened?" "Ask your paper," she said, and threw it at his chest. He caught it. He read the line in his own hand. And she watched the excuse assemble behind his eyes. She was learning that too, the exact machinery of a Corvain lie. And she watched him, for the first time since she'd known him, decide not to use it. "Sit down before you fall down," he said quietly, "and I'll tell you the truth. All of it. I'm only going to be able to do it once, so let me do it while you're too tired to hit me." And then he didn't tell her, because she swayed, and he caught her. And the bond opened between them like a struck door, and this time neither of them pulled away. What poured through was not fear, now, nor fury. It was the thing he'd been swallowing since the dark yard, the true self he kept behind the golden one. And it was lonely in a way that took her breath. 19 years of performing so no one would look too close at the frightened boy who'd been handed a beta's collar too young. The exhaustion of being clever every waking hour. And underneath all of it, aimed at her, plain and undefended, and appalled at itself, a tenderness that had nothing to do with plots or paper. He cared for her, not the lead she was, not the weapon she might be, her. The pot girl who held rooms and lost arguments about knives and would not be bought. She had been valued for her balance, for her watchfulness, for her sword and her silence, and her use. She had never once, in her whole, careful life, stood in the plain path of someone simply, helplessly glad that she existed, and it undid her faster than the venom had. "Tell me to send you away, Kier," Corvain said, his forehead coming down to rest against hers. "And I will. I'll never trouble you again." "How? Don't," Eloin said, and every careful thing in her went quiet at last. He kissed her, the way a man drinks who has been rationed his whole life and just been told, the rationing is over. And she, who had spent 9 years making herself the smallest, quietest thing in any room, let herself, for one breath, simply be held, the bond made lying impossible. That was the terror of it, and the gift. Every time she braced for the flicker of calculation behind his eyes, the angle, the use, the thing men like him always wanted from women like her in the end, the bond gave her only the truth underneath, and the truth was staggering and simple, and had no strategy anywhere in it. He wanted her to stay. Not for the arena, not for the throne, for the arguing about knives, and the way she held a room without trying, and the fact that she had been the one person in 19 years to look at the golden beta and say, "I can tell the difference." "You're crying," he said, wondering, as though she'd handed him something. "I'm not," Eloin said, and he didn't laugh at her for it, only brushed the wet of it away with his thumb, like it was a thing he'd been given and not a thing she'd lost hold of. They stayed like that a long while, her head tucked beneath his jaw, the lamp burning low, the bond humming quiet and warm between them, and carrying every true thing he had never learned how to say. She had spent 9 years being the last thing anyone looked at. He looked at her as though she were the only thing in the world worth looking at, and worse, through the bond she knew it was not a lie, and that undid her more thoroughly than any wound. For the length of one warm hour, she let herself believe that whatever the lie had been, this was not it. She woke before dawn to a cold place, where he'd been. For a moment she lay still, listening. The compound slept, and along the bond, faint but unmistakable, came a thread of him, awake, somewhere below her, and braced the particular held-breath tension of a man doing something he does not want to be caught doing. She followed it. Down a stair she'd never taken, behind a door she'd thought was a cupboard. She found a small windowless room, and Corvain in it, and a wall she would see behind her eyes for a long time after. Papers. Dozens of them, pinned and strung. A whole silent web of them. Names and lines drawn between names, and old ledgers, and a purge 9 years gone, and a house she'd never heard him speak aloud, and at the center of all of it, ringed and circled and connected by 100 threads to every other thing on the wall, her own name. Corvain turned and saw her in the doorway, and went utterly still. "Eloin," he said, very carefully. "This isn't what it looks like. Say something true," she told him. "Or, don't say anything at all." For once in his life, Corvain didn't reach for the clever thing. He looked at the wall, and at her, and he set down the paper in his hand, as though it had become very heavy. "There is a house," he said, "called Marrow. 9 years ago, they reached for the throne and missed, and my king's father broke them for it. The ones who drew steel, not all of them drew steel. Some of them simply vanished, and waited, and have spent 9 years since bleeding this pack from the inside. The supplies that go missing, the orders that contradict, the men who've come for my throat in my own yard." His jaw tightened. "I've been hunting the root of it for 2 years, and every root I follow ends in the same dark. Someone patient, someone trusted, someone with reach into my own household and a grudge 9 years deep. And me," Eloin said. Her voice didn't sound like hers. "How do I end up on your wall, Beta? Because when I had you looked into after the arena," he said, "I found what the king found, a girl with no beginning. And then I found the rest, which the king has not, that the woman who bore you was of House Marrow's blood and died the winter the house fell, and that her daughter was carried out of the fire by a man who then hid her in plain sight in the lowest tavern in Carrick and waited 9 years for her to be useful. He met her eyes. I kept you close because every thread on this wall runs through the man who raised you. I needed to know if you were his blade or his victim. I know now. But by the time I knew," his voice cracked just once, "I no longer cared what you were. I only cared that you were mine. That part was never on the wall, Eloin. That part I never planned." The rest was drowned under one word. "Hallvard," she said. "Eloin, no." She was shaking her head, backing toward the door. "No, not Hallvard. You don't know him. He pulled me out of the dirt. He fed me when no one else would look at me twice. He taught me everything I have. In the dark, for 9 years. Asking nothing, asking you to stay small," Corvain said softly. "Asking you never to be seen. Keeping the one weapon he'd made hidden in a scabbard until the day he had a use for the blade." He took a step toward her, and she flinched, and he stopped at once, the way he always stopped, and she hated that she noticed. Hated that even now the shape of his care was familiar. The grievances. Eloan. The pack that starves girls like you and feeds men like me. The rot at the top. Whose words are those? Truly. Say them in your own voice and tell me you didn't learn them at his bench. Her mouth opened. Because she could hear it. Halvard at the whetstone across 100 nights, patient, grinding his old grief into her like oil into steel. The pack has grown fat and blind and cruel. It feeds men like Corvain and starves girls like you. She had said as much herself, in her own mouth. Girls like me don't get given chances. We get given trays. And worn his grief as though it were her own skin, and never once noticed it wasn't hers. For 9 years, she had believed the anger was her own, the slow, banked fury at a pack that let girls like her carry trays and gave men like Corvain titles. It had felt like the truest thing in her. And now she stood in a cold stone room and watched it come apart in her hands like a thing that had never been hers at all, only lent, planted, and tended patiently in the dark by a gardener who had always known exactly what he meant to harvest. She thought she might be sick. He gave me somewhere to put it, she said, and didn't know whether she meant the grief or the rage or the whole of the 9 years when I had nowhere. When I was 13 and there was nothing left of me. You don't know what that is. To a child with nothing, someone who looks at you and sees a use. It feels like being saved. You'd forgive a man almost anything for that. I know, Corvain said, and the unbearable part was that he did. She could feel it through the bond, plain and grieving without a scrap of triumph in it. It's the cleverest cage there is, Iloan. The ones we're grateful for. We hold the door shut ourselves. And that was the thing she could not forgive him for. Not that he was wrong, but that he was so gentle about being right. You should have told me, she whispered. You'd not have believed me. His voice was raw. The one man you trust in all the world. And me 3 weeks in your life, with a lie already between us. If I'd said Halvard is the spider, you'd have run straight to him. So I said nothing, and kept you close, and prayed. I'd find the proof before he found a use for you. He shut his eyes, and I was right, that you wouldn't believe me. I can see that I was right. So it doesn't matter that I'm also right about him. It landed like a slap. Because it was true. And the truth of it was the worst thing in the room. So she reached past it, to the older wound, the one that had been in her longer than he had. It doesn't matter, she said. And her voice steadied around the cruelty of it, because cruelty was easier to stand up in than grief. You knew what I was, and you kept it from me, and let me give you my whole heart anyway. Men like you don't see women like me as anything but useful. I let myself forget that. You let me forget it. She was at the door. That's the lie, Beta. Not the wall. The wall's the only honest thing in this room. Aloan. He didn't follow. He'd learned that much. Everything on that wall is true, and so was the hour before it, both. That's the part you can't. She walked out. The corridor was black and cold, and she got perhaps 10 paces into it before a shape unfolded from the dark familiar as her own hands, and a voice she had trusted longer than she'd trusted anything said, gently, Eloan child. You're white as a sheet. What has he done to you? Halvard stepped into the thin light, one eye milky, one eye sharp, arms already opening, and every instinct, 9 years in the making, pulled her toward them. She went into his arms because her body knew the way, and because it hurt too much not to, and because some cold, watching part of her had already begun to count and needed him to believe she hadn't. It was a lie, Halvard, she said into his shoulder, and let the tears come, and meant every one even as she used them, all of it. I was only ever a thread to pull. I know. His hand moved over her hair, slow, the way it had when she was small. I'd hoped to spare you this. But I'm afraid it's worse than a broken heart, child. Far worse. There's no time. And you're the only one who can stop it. And then he told her. He told it beautifully. That was the thing she would remember. How good he was, how the lie fit every crack the night had torn open in her. Corvain was no victim of these murders, Halvard said. Corvain had staged them. A beta, who survives 3 attempts on his life, looks like a man the gods have chosen. It was all theater, and tonight, before the assembled lords, the king's beloved second meant to see Osric dead and seize the pack for himself. He'll do it in the open, Halvard said, with 100 witnesses, so it reads as chaos and not murder, and the only voice that could damn him is yours, his betrothed, the woman who loves him. If you stand before the council and swear you saw his hand in it, no lord in that room will doubt a word. It has to be you, child. It has to come from the one person no one believes would lie for spite. And, Eloin, her heart in genuine pieces, listened to the man who had raised her, ask her to put a blade in the man she loved, and heard, threaded through the beautiful lie, the one loose stitch that unraveled all of it. You said 3 attempts, she said quietly. Child, the yard. The venomed blade in the ring today. That's 2. She lifted her head. You said 3. And the third never left this household, the bolt on the east stair, a month before I ever came here. Corvain buried it so deep, the watch captain doesn't know it happened. She kept her voice as gentle as his. So how does an old blademaster in a tanner's yard know a thing only the man with the seal could know? Silence. She had spent her whole life reading the half-second before a man decides to lie, and she read this one to the bottom. Because you moved the watch off the wall, Halvard, she said, and the last warm thing in her went out like a snuffed lamp. Because it was never the pack that starved girls like me, it was you. You pulled me out of the fire, and kept me small, and waited 9 years for a use, and found one, the night you put a blade in my hands and told me not to lose. You didn't sharpen me to save me, you sharpened me to spend me. Halvard looked at her a long moment, and then the gentleness slid off his face like a coat he'd finished kneading, and what was underneath was so much older and colder that she wondered how she had never once seen it. You were always going to be the most useful thing I ever made, he said. Don't spoil it now. Come to the council, say your lines, and sit at the high table of the house your mother died for, or be a pot girl who dies unseen in the dark, exactly as I raised you to be. Choose, Eloin, but choose walking. She made her face crumple. She made herself take his hand. What do we do? She whispered. Because there was only one way to break a trap. This good, let it close. In a room full of witnesses, where a spoken lie could be turned inside out before the very lords it was meant to fool. The Council of Houses sat in the long hall, and every great name in Greymark turned when Halvard led her in. At the high table, the Alpha King watched them come with a face like weather. Corvain stood at his right hand, and when he saw her walk in on Halvard's arm, something in his face simply died, because he thought she'd come to bury him, and had decided, she could see, to let her. Majesty, my lords, Halvard bowed low. It grieves an old servant of the crown to bring this, but your beta has betrayed you, and I have here a witness whose love for him puts her word past any doubt. He drew her forward. Eloin of Carrick, his own betrothed. Tell the king what the beta means to do tonight. Every face in the hall turned to her. She looked at Corvain. I should have believed you an hour sooner, she told him, with no words at all. Watch what I do with the hour I have left. Then she turned to the king. I saw nothing of the sort, Eloin said, because there is nothing of the sort to see. The traitor in this hall is the man whose arm I am holding. The room detonated. Halvard went rigid. She raised her voice over all of it. He knew of an attempt on the beta's life that never left this household, and only the man who ordered it could. Search the yard behind the Tanner's Row, Majesty. Now, tonight, while he stands here and cannot reach it, see whether you find an old man's grief, or House Marrow's ledgers and the coin that bought every blade that's come for your beta's throat. This is a heartbroken girl, Halvard said, and his voice was perfectly steady, grasping at. Then a search costs you nothing, said Osric of Greymark, very quietly, and nodded to his guards. And Halvard, who had been patient for 9 years, understood in that instant that he had lost and did the only thing left to a cornered wolf. He drew the knife from his sleeve and lunged, not at the king, not at Corvain, at her. Of course at her. She'd always been the thing he cared about most. In the end, in his way, the blade that had turned in his hand. But this was the one thing, in the whole ruinous night, that Elowyn knew how to do, without thinking, and she learned it from him. She turned into the strike instead of away, took his knife arm at the wrist, and used the old man's own weight to fold him down onto the stone, her knee dropping between his shoulders exactly where he'd taught her to put it, 1,000 times, in the dark. The knife spun away across the flagstones, and she brought her mouth close to his ear, in the ringing silence of the hall, and said, the only thing she had left for the man who had made her. You taught me every move I have, Halvard. Her voice did not shake. You should have taught me fewer. Then the king's guards had him, and hauled him up, and the long 9 years' war of House Marrow ended, not with a battle, but with an old man dragged from a hall by the arms. The lords erupted, Osric came to his feet, and through the chaos, Corvain looked at her like a man who already knows what he's about to lose, because he was right, and she was already turning for the door. Elowyn. He caught her at the threshold, and did not touch her. You saved my life. Even after everything, I came to stop a traitor, Elowyn said. That's all it was. She made herself watch the hope go out of his face, because she had earned the right to be believed, and he had spent it. I know exactly what I felt in that room, she said, before he could name it. And I know you knew what I was, and let me open my whole chest to you anyway. A bond doesn't undo that, Beta. It only means I'll feel you the whole time I'm learning to live without you. She stepped back. I'm glad you'll live. But I can't trust you. I don't know that I ever will again. Elowyn, please. She walked out. They named her a Shield of Greymark before the next moon, the first woman ever to wear the grey cord, the pot girl who had unmasked a traitor in the king's own hall, and she was good at it, the way she'd always secretly known she'd be good at anything anyone ever let her try. The tack that had laughed on the sand did not laugh now. Halvard's web came down, thread by thread. The clerk who had pressed the seal for him confessed. House Marrow's long rot was cut out of the guard clean, and the city that had wanted a joke discovered it had been handed a champion instead, and slowly, grudgingly, began to love her for it. Osric himself gave her the cord. There's the door and you opened, he said, pinning it. Your mother's house reached for a throne and got 9 years of ash. You reached for nothing but your own 2 feet, and got this. The better bargain, I think. See that you remember it. She remembered it. She threw herself into the work like a woman outrunning something, and the something had pale eyes and a golden smile, and lived 3 corridors away. Corvain did not perform anymore. That was the first thing anyone noticed. The beta, who'd spent 19 years being clever, went quiet, and did the real work he'd hidden behind the charm all along. And the pack found, to its confusion, that its second was not a fool, and never had been. He rebuilt the watch. He heard the barracks grievances himself, standing in the yards at the cold edge of the night. He was, people began to say, a different man, and only Elowyn knew. He was simply the same man with the mask finally set down, and it made it worse, not better, that she'd been the one to knock it off him. He wrote to her. The letters came 2 and 3 a week, in his own hand, and she should have burned them and read every one. Some were long, some were a single line. Some weren't about her at all. A posting, a supply dispute, a knife argument. He'd finally conceded she'd won, as though her honest answer were still worth something to him. One read, I keep trying to write a word big enough for what I did, and there isn't one. So I keep sending the small ones. Sorry. It's a poor coin, and I've nothing better to pay you in. Another, you said men like me never see women like you as anything but useful. The truest thing I ever did was let you believe I proved you right. I didn't. You were the first person I ever wanted to be honest with, and I spent your trust instead of earning it. I'd give the throne itself to spend it slower. And won. Near the bottom of a long page she'd sworn she wouldn't finish. I don't want you back because you're useful, Eloin. Gods know you were never that. You cost me a champion, a conspiracy, and every certainty I had about myself. I want you back, because none of it means anything if you're not in the room to argue with me about knives. Pell and Tamsin, of course, had opinions. Good, Tamsin said. In the early weeks when Eloin came down to the Iron Oak on her rest days and sat at her old stool that no one else was allowed to sit. Let him ache. You don't owe that gold-plated fool a thing. But by the 4th month, the wind had shifted. He fixed the grain lines to the outer holds, Pell said one evening. The ones you always said were rotten. Did it quiet? Didn't put his name on it? A pause. He's written you. How many? Now. I don't count them, Eloin lied. 41, said Tamsin, who apparently did. The bond did not help. Leave a bond open, and it deepened. Deepen it, and it set. So she kept it shut, and hoped it would wither, from neglect and let her go, and it did not wither. It stayed exactly where it was. A warm, patient thread under her ribs, carrying just enough of him that she knew, every night, that 3 corridors away a man was lying awake, missing her, and hated that the knowing was a comfort. Then, in the 6th month, a letter came that was different. Eloin, I'm sorry. You've made yourself clear, and I'll honor it. I should have honored it long ago instead of making my grief your burden. You don't owe me your forgiveness, and you certainly don't owe me your peace, and I've spent too much of the second chasing the first. I'll stop now. Be well. Be seen. You were always the best of us. See. It was precisely what she'd been demanding for half a year, so she could not at all explain why it felt like a door closing on her fingers. He kept his word. No more letters. No more turning up at her shoulder. When they passed in the corridors, he inclined his head, shield even and polite, and never cold, never once cold, and simply, entirely, done. This is what you wanted, she told herself, and did her work, and did it well, and every night the warm thread under her ribs stayed exactly where it was, and refused to fade until the knock. Pell came through her door, white to the lips, Tamsin a step behind him, with the same gray look, and Eloin was on her feet, before either of them spoke. He's gone, Pell said. The beta. Not in his rooms, not on the grounds, not Eloin. No one's seen him since the evening bell. His sword's on its stand. His horse is in its stall. The trackers caught his scent to the east gate, and it just stops. The way a scent stops, she thought, cold to the bone, when a man is being careful, or when a man is being carried. And because she had spent 6 months smothering the one thing that could find him, she pressed her hand flat to her chest, over the shut bond, and, telling herself it was duty, telling herself he was the king's second, and finding him was her sworn work, telling herself every lie but the true one, she opened it. It hit her like a door blown off its hinges in a storm. Grief first, deep and drowning. The twin of the one she'd carried for half a year, then something reckless and dark and untethered. And under it all, faint, swimming, wrong. His thoughts come loose and drifting, the world gone soft at the edges around him. She was moving before she'd finished the thought. Out the door at a dead run, the bond hauling her forward through the dark like a rope with both their hearts tied to the end of it. The bond pulled her down out of the palace and through the sleeping upper city, down the hill she'd climbed 100 times, into the low streets where the lamps gave out, and stopped her, at last, in front of a door she had opened 10,000 times with a tray in her hands. The Iron Oak, warm light in the windows. Of course. Of course. She went in low and ready, braced for a back room, a blade, a body, and stopped dead. There was no ambush. There was only the king's beta, slumped half across the bar at the far end, collar open, golden hair at catastrophe, one hand loose around a cup, talking with enormous earnestness to a deeply uncomfortable Tamsin who caught Eloan's eye over his head with an expression of pure, exhausted relief. The beta of Greymark was spectacularly drunk. Relief hit her first, hot and total. Because he was alive, he was whole, no one had carried him anywhere but here. And then, right behind it, the fury because she was going to kill him. And the worst of it, Corvain was telling Tamsin, listing gently sideways, is that she's right. She's always right. It's her single most infuriating quality, and I miss it like a limb. You have got, Eloan said, to be joking. He turned. The ruined, drowning expression on his face broke open into something so purely delighted it hurt to look at, and down the wide-open bond she felt it hit him all at once. Joy and disbelief, and a love so undefended it had no idea it was showing. Eloan, he breathed, like a man saying a prayer he'd stopped believing in. You vanished, she said, low and shaking. No guard, no word. The trackers thought you'd been taken, Corvain. And you're here, getting drunk in the tavern where you, her voice failed, where you called me helpless. I wanted to see it again, he said simply. The place I was the biggest fool I've ever been. I've been so many kinds of fool since. I got sentimental about the original. He blinked at her, swaying. I said I'd stop. I meant to. I came to the one room that ever made me brave. And it turns out it only makes me loud. He set the cup down with the exaggerated care of a man who knows he's wobbling. Eloan, ask me something. I'll tell you the truth. I can't find a single lie tonight. I've looked. She should have marched him home. Instead, fool that she was, she asked the thing she'd been swallowing for 6 months. Why did you stop writing? Because I was spending your peace to buy my comfort, he said. And you'd already told me, once, that I spend what I ought to earn, so I stopped spending. He looked up at her, wretched and honest, and entirely without armor. The open bond pouring the truth of it straight into her chest. I'd rather ache in silence the rest of my life than take one more thing from you that you didn't freely give, even hope, especially hope. The whole tavern had gone quiet. She was distantly aware of Tamsin pretending to polish a spotless cup. Prove it, Eloan heard herself say. Corvain looked at her for a long, swaying moment. And then the king's beta, drunk half off a bar stool in the lowest tavern in Carrick, straightened as much as he was able, and reached for the last thing he had left to wager. Marry me, he said. For real, this time. Not an oath you forced out of my pride. One I'm offering you sober. Or I would be, if the room would hold still. His voice dropped, and the bravado fell out of it, and what was left was small and undefended and true. You entered my arena. Eloan, come into my life. Win and you're stuck with me. The whole right, the whole ruin, all of it. And I swear to you before this entire tavern that hasn't the decency to stop listening, there'll be no taking it back. The wager he'd flung at her across this same room, half a year and a whole lifetime ago, came home turned inside out. No takebacks, beta. She looked at him, caught between wanting to throttle him and wanting to catch him before he slid to the floor, which he was slowly doing, and she thought about being small, and being seen, and being wanted for her use, and being wanted for nothing at all but herself, by a man who'd learned the difference the hard way and bled for it. Ask me again tomorrow, Eloan said, when you can remember doing it. His eyes cracked open, hopeful and blurred. And you'll say yes? She reached out and steadied him. The first time she'd touched him in 6 months. The bond flaring warm and bright and glad between them, and she did not answer. And her not answering was the most hopeful thing she'd done in half a year. Ask me tomorrow, she said, and find out. He was asleep against her shoulder before they reached the door. In the end, it took him a month of asking, sober, in every way a man can be. he asked across the war table, until the king threatened to hold the wedding himself for the quiet. He asked on the east wall, with 2 cups of cocoa going cold in his hands. He asked badly and beautifully, and every day Eloin told him to ask again tomorrow, until one ordinary morning, she looked at the man grinning hopefully over breakfast, and found she'd run out of reasons to make him wait. The whole city came out for it. The boy Beta nobody had taken seriously, and the pot girl who'd broken a champion, unmasked a traitor and seen the man behind the golden smile before anyone bothered to look. He cried during the vows. She'd known he would, she didn't quite, but it was a near thing, and the bond gave her away regardless, and he laughed at her through his own tears. "You're stuck with me now," he murmured when it was done. "No taking it back." "Why would I take it back?" said Eloin, who had once signed her own name to a roster in a silent tavern and changed the course of 2 lives with it. "I'm the one who entered the arena, if you recall." "Best bout you ever fought," Corvain agreed. She kissed him. For once, she didn't argue.